Hello and welcome to the first video in the Analyzing PowerShell Payloads series. In this example, we will be examining a common encoded PowerShell payload that is designed to execute a little bit of shellcode, which will connect back to an adversary C2 infrastructure to enable them to have remote access to a system. To analyze this payload, I'll be using the open source project CyberChef that was developed by GCHQ. It is a fantastic utility. I've been using it for a long time. If you just go to your search engine, type in CyberChef, it should be the first result. And I understand that there are multiple techniques and tools that analysts can use to get the same data. And I don't think one approach is better than the next. It's just whatever works for the analyst, in my opinion. This is the way that I learned before I know how to do it. This is the way that made sense to me. So that's the way I'm going to show it. And hopefully this will make sense to someone else and help them out. So depending, let's just jump into it, I think. Depending on how familiar you are with PowerShell, this may seem like an intimidating amount of data. But the good news is that one thing you can always lean back on is when you're looking at this kind of stuff is that typically all the information that you need to deobfuscate the payload is included within the payload itself. It's just a matter of undoing the operations on the data itself to get to the deobfuscated data. So that's why I always recommend analysts start from the obfuscated data and work their way outwards in terms of functions that are applied to it. And additionally, there are keywords that you can hone in on that will help guide you through the deobfuscation process. So if we look at this PowerShell command that contains some obfuscated data, we can safely ignore the first 3 lines, really. I mean, you'll see this all of the time if you start looking at this, but this is just setting up the parameters that PowerShell should run. So the payload is saying, hey, start PowerShell, the executable, but make sure you start it in a way that is going to be hidden from any user. So they're not able to interact with the window or they're not tipped off that PowerShell is running. -C is for command. And then this ampersand is the call operator in PowerShell. And it's just to say, run whatever's in these parentheses after the ampersand. So be it an executable, be it a script, or be it a script block, like in this case, just run it, okay? And the term script block here, you see it defined right here at the beginning, is a term in PowerShell that means, it can mean multiple different statements or expressions that should be evaluated as one unit. So everything contained in the script block parentheses, evaluate that first before passing it off to the call operator. Moving along into the next line, we run into our first keyword, which is system.io.compression.gzipstream. And this tells us that the payload is using the built-in functionality into Windows to compress a bit of data in the gzip file format. What bit of data, you may ask? And it's whatever's contained within the next set of parentheses. So we move through here, and then we run on the next line into our next keyword, which is from base64 string. And this tells us that whatever data is in the next set of parentheses should be considered base64. And this function converts that from base64. So even though it looks like a lot, like there's a lot going on, all we really need to concern ourselves with is that it's base64 data and this function is converting it. So let's move right past it. Finally, we have another keyword is system.io.compression.compression mode decompress. And what this tells us, along with the gzip stream, so this is decompressing the compressed data, is we can take from that knowing that we're going to use the gunzip function in CyberChef. So just put that in the back of your brain. Whenever you see gzip stream and decompress, that converts to gunzip in CyberChef. And the rest of it, we can ignore because all it's doing is making sure it's specifying parameters and then actually running whatever it just defined as code. So let's take a look at, let's start with the process. So like I said before, we always start at the obfuscated data and work our way backwards. So here's our obfuscated data, and we want to do a from base64 in CyberChef. Now, to make things kind of clean, and easier to work with, so that we can always like walk back what we've done instead of worrying about copying and pasting data over and over again. We're going to use a regular expression here in CyberChef to just select the base 64 data. So we will change this to list matches. You'll see a change in the output. And this lets CyberChef know that any of the following functions that we define only apply it to the data that matches our regex. So we have our base 64. If we remember there, we're going to use from base 64 on that, and we get the data's changed. Now, it's still nothing really in there. It doesn't look like there's any kind of interesting information on there, but remember, we're going to work our way backwards to our next keyword, which was gzip stream. And so we know that we had to do a gunzip, and we apply that. Now we have some human readable information. Knowing what we know now, all we know is that we're looking for those keywords, and we are applying from our methodology from obfuscated data, working our way up. So we can kind of blow past this information because these are defining some functions, but it's not obfuscated. We don't see any of our keywords. Again, function, not obfuscated. Even if it doesn't make sense to us at this time, it's not obfuscated, and we can work past it. It is, some variables being assigned until we get to our next keyword, which is from base 64 string again. So we know that this bit of data right here is base 64 encoded data. And as we go down, I don't see any more of our keywords and no more obfuscated data. So let's again start at our obfuscated data. We'll do it again with a regular expression. And switch this to list matches. Here we go. And then apply our from base 64. And here we have our user agent string. And then if we move along, we can see that towards the end here, it's always going to be located towards the end, here's our C2 IP address. And that's how you extract the tactical intelligence from an encoded PowerShell payload using CyberChef.